For this next topic, we want to learn about making decisions and writing conclusions, in particular the writing conclusions part. So when you look at your large hypothesis test process, which you again don't really know what all this means, you do know how step 1 works now, how you write your hypotheses. But if you scroll through to step 5, it says if the p-value is less than alpha, which you don't know what that means yet, reject H naught. So you're going to make a decision about rejecting H naught or not rejecting H naught. Those are really your only two options. And you can see it says state the conclusion. And if I look at another type of hypothesis test, this is the next one, it says state the conclusion. And then if I skip through to chapter 11, which is right here, you can see you'll be doing more hypothesis testing in chapter 11, state the conclusion. State the conclusion, right? So it'll help if we know how to write a conclusion, since it's being assumed all over the place that we do for this larger hypothesis test process that we're going to have to use for chapters 10 and 11. So we can see, all right, in step 5, I'm going to make a decision. I'm either going to reject H naught or do not reject H naught. That is it. Those are the only two options you ever get to make for step 5. Reject H naught or do not reject H naught. Again, you don't know why you make those choices yet, but that's all you're ever going to have, ever, right? So then, if you choose to reject H naught, then you will write this as your conclusion. You will say, there is sufficient evidence to support the claim that, right? So there is sufficient evidence to support the claim that, and then you're going to write out what H1 was in words. Write your alternative in words and context, right? This is a script that you will follow, right? What I'm giving you right here. Here. These are scripts you're going to follow, right? No matter what. As a matter of fact, the rejecting H naught and do not reject H naught is also a script, and you will follow it. Okay? So if you do reject H naught, you're saying, look, I don't think H naught was true. There is sufficient evidence to support the claim of H1. And you're going to write H1 with context in words and stuff. And then if you do not reject H naught, then you write there is not sufficient evidence to support the claim that. This is all you ever get to write. That's it, right? You don't get to deviate from that. With the exception of sometimes I accept the word enough instead of sufficient, right? But that's about it, right? Now, the big difference between these two is, of course, the word not. This one has not because it goes with do not reject. When you do not reject, there is not sufficient evidence to support the claim. We never accept or prove anything. I can't say, oh, I accept H1. Nope. You do not accept anything. If I see the word accept, I mark the whole problem wrong, and then you're very unhappy. So we never, never, never accept or prove anything. We don't prove hypotheses are true or false, although sometimes I will slip up and say that terminology. But what it is we're showing that we have sufficient evidence to support H1 or H naught, but that's all we can do. And we'll talk more about that in another page or so. All right, so let's practice this with a particular example. We have boxes of a certain kind of cereal are labeled as containing 16 ounces. An inspector thinks that the mean weight may be less than this so that the company can scam its customers, right? Saying there's 16 ounces, but there's actually 15 is good for the company, unless they get caught. So he collects a random sample of cereal boxes and weighs them to test his idea. All right. First thing they want us to do is practice one more time writing the null and alternative hypotheses in symbols. Oh, it just occurred to me. I should have written up here. You write H1 in with context. That's the most important part. So when I say with words there, what I mean is context. And we're going to have it right down below. You'll see. All right. So this null and alternative hypotheses. Well, I know that the null is H0. I know the alternative is H1. I know the null always has an equal sign in it. Now we're talking about the mean weight. Honestly, they didn't even have to write the word mean, and we could figure out what this was. There's no way this was a proportion, and we're not doing standard deviation, so it's right there. So this is mean. All right, now this researcher thinks that it may be less than, so that means that it's going to be less than. And the assumed amount, unless we can prove it otherwise, is right here, 16 ounces. Actually, I'm going to do that in purple. OZ, you can and should have units if they're given. So in this case, it would be 16 ounces. So there's the null and there's the alternative hypothesis. And you'll notice, by the way, after the H0 and the H1, there's a colon there. It's not an equal sign, it's a colon. So H0 colon is this, H1 colon is this. I know it seems crazy, but the symbols are important. You have to follow the symbology as it's given. All right. Now, if the inspector decides to reject the null hypothesis, okay, so that's their decision. So their decision is to reject H0 right there. Reject H0. How would the statistician write that conclusion? All right. If we reject H0, we write this, right? It goes together. See that arrow in there? Follow it. So we would write, there is sufficient evidence to support the claim that. That is a script you cannot avoid. You have to follow it. You have to write it down. So there is sufficient evidence to support the claim that. Now, what was the alternative hypothesis in words? So here's H1. What's that saying? It's saying that the mean weight is less than 16 ounces. So that the mean, or you could say average if you want. It's a terrible use of the word average, but we know what you mean. The mean weight of the cereal is less than 16 ounces. Done, right? I wrote down the script in green, and then I followed up with H1 in context. That's the part that changes for every problem, but it's still a script you're following. Now, what if the researcher chooses to not reject H0, right? So that's this decision right here, is that you do not reject H0. That would be what you write for step 5. You don't, again, know how that works yet, but that's okay. So then for step 6, you're writing your conclusion. You would say, there is, wait for it, not sufficient evidence. It's exactly the same otherwise. The same words. The only difference is this has the word not in it. Evidence. Oh, I have too many E's in there. Evidence to support the claim that, and the H1 doesn't change, right? It's still the mean weight of the cereal is less than 16 ounces. H1 never changed, right? The only thing that changes in the two conclusions is the word not. That's it. Otherwise, they are exactly identical in all ways. So that's a little strange, right? And it's a very much a formulaic script that you must follow, but it's a little bit weird. So you'll notice in step 5, which again, you don't know about the steps yet, but you can see what it's saying. You either reject H0 or do not reject H0. So you're saying something about H0, the null hypothesis. Let me put it this way, making a decision, right? When we make our decision about H0, about the null hypothesis. And by the way, when I say that, I'm not saying H0, N-O-T, I'm saying H0, N-A-U-G-H-T, as in it's all for naught, right? So it means nothing, right? So you make decision about H0, the null hypothesis. But in step 6, we're writing the conclusion about H1. Just if I can spell the word conclusion, about H1, the alternative. So that's a little bit strange because the alternative is always going to be your claim, right? Always. So for us. So your claim is going to be about H1. So when you decide to reject H0, then you're saying you have enough to support your claim. If you do not reject H0, then you do not have enough to support your claim. Everything's about trying to support the claim you're making, and that claim will always be in your alternative hypothesis. So it's a little bit weird, but you'll get used to it because you must follow this script. It never changes and it never wavers, even into chapter 11. And if we kept going 12 and 13 and 14, it would always be this way. What we write here for the orange part would change based on the type of problem we've got, but the script portion of it never changes.